All right, let's just jump right in. We've all seen the headlines, right? SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, the list goes on. And you have to wonder, how does one guy seem to be at the center of it all, shaking up industries that have, like, nothing to do with each other?
I mean, really think about that. It's not just about working hard. Plenty of people are brilliant. Plenty of people work insane hours. So how on earth does one person get to a world-class level in rocketry, electric cars, and artificial intelligence, all at the same time? It honestly sounds impossible.
Well, here's the thing. The answer isn't some kind of magic or a genius gene. It's actually a system, a two-part framework for thinking that's surprisingly straightforward. It's a way to learn and a way to solve problems. And that's exactly what we're going to break down right now.
Okay, so step one is all about how he takes in information. And it's way more than just reading a bunch of stuff. It's about how he organizes that knowledge in his head to build this, unshakable foundation.
You know, when someone asked him how he learned to build rockets, his answer was so simple. I read a lot of books. And he wasn't exaggerating. His own brother said that as a teenager, he would read for 10 hours a day. Get this, by the 4th grade, he'd already read every book in his local library and moved on to reading the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. That's the fuel for this whole process.
But what's really key is how he organizes all that information. He uses this mental model of a semantic tree. So picture a tree. The trunk, that's the fundamental principles of a subject, the absolute core truths that everything else grows out of. Then you have the big branches, which are the core concepts. And finally, you've got the leaves, all the little specific details.
And this is where it gets really interesting. See, most of us learn by just collecting a bunch of facts, like scattered leaves on the ground. But Musk says that without the trunk and the branches, those leaves have nothing to hang on to. They just blow away. By building the tree first, by really understanding the fundamentals, he can walk into a brand new field, see how it connects to other things he knows, and start innovating in ways that nobody else even sees.
Okay, so once he's got this super solid knowledge tree built, he moves on to the second part of the framework. This is the really powerful bit. It's how he uses that foundation to tackle problems that literally everyone else thinks are impossible.
He calls it first principles thinking. The simplest way to think about it is, well, it's thinking like a physicist. You just ignore all the assumptions, you ignore what other people are doing, and you boil a situation down to the most basic, fundamental truths you can prove. And only then do you start building your argument or your solution back up from there.
Now, this is the complete opposite of how most of us operate day to day. We mostly think by analogy. You know, we do things a certain way because, well, that's how it's always been done. We try to make small improvements on what already exists, and hey, it's easier. It takes way less mental energy. But first principles thinking is about throwing out the instruction manual and starting from scratch. It asks what is absolutely 100% true here, and then it forges a totally new path based on that truth.
Now, I know this might sound a little abstract, so let's look at a couple of huge real-world examples where this exact framework, build a knowledge tree, then think from first principles, just completely turned an entire industry on its head.
Let's start with Tesla. Back in the early days, the #1 thing stopping electric cars from going mainstream was the absolutely insane cost of the batteries. The conventional wisdom, the analogy everyone was using, was, hey, batteries are expensive, that's just the way it is. But Musk's team refused to accept that. They went back to first principles. They asked, what is a battery actually made of? They literally broke it down to its raw components: cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon. Then they just looked up the prices for those metals on the market. And the result was just staggering. The market price for a battery pack was about $600 per kilowatt hour, but the fundamental cost of the raw materials? Only about $80. So the real problem wasn't physics. It was just that the existing manufacturing process was incredibly inefficient.
Okay, example number 2, SpaceX. Musk's grand vision was to make humanity a multiplanetary species. Just one tiny problem. Rockets were astronomically expensive. He actually went to Russia to try and buy a couple of old ones, and they quoted him a price so high it was basically a joke. The whole dream was dead on arrival. So what did he do? You guessed it. Back to first principles. He asked, okay, what is a rocket actually made of? It's aerospace-grade aluminum alloys, titanium, copper, carbon fiber. So, what do those things cost on the market? And what he discovered was that the raw material cost of an entire rocket was only about 2% of the going price. 2%.
So all of a sudden, the logic became just undeniable. The goal is to get to Mars. The big obstacle is that rockets cost a fortune. But the first principles insight is that 98% of that cost is not in the actual stuff the rocket is made of. The only logical solution then was to forget the existing industry, buy the raw materials himself, and figure out how to build the rockets from scratch. And that, right there, is why SpaceX even exists.
This is all really fascinating to see on a grand scale. But you're probably thinking, okay, great for him, but how does this help me? Well, there's actually a really simple and powerful technique you can start using today to get into this mindset.
It's called the 5 Whys technique. It was famously developed at Toyota to stop people from just fixing surface-level issues and instead force them to dig down to the actual root cause of a problem. And the idea is just what it sounds like. Whatever the problem is, you just keep asking why about 5 times until you hit rock bottom.
Let's just walk through a quick, classic example of how this works. Let's say a robot on a factory floor suddenly stops working. Okay, first question. Why did the robot stop? Well, the circuit overloaded and blew a fuse. Okay, a lazy answer would be to just replace the fuse. But we ask again, why did the circuit overload? Because the bearings weren't moving freely, they seized up. Getting warmer. Why did the bearings seize? Well, because they didn't have enough lubrication. Okay, so why weren't they lubricated? Because the oil pump wasn't pumping. We're almost there. One last time. Why wasn't the pump working? Because the intake was clogged with tiny metal shavings.
And boom, there it is. The root cause wasn't a bad fuse, it was that the oil pump didn't have a simple, cheap filter on it to stop the metal shavings. See the difference? Fixing the fuse is a temporary patch. Adding a filter is a permanent solution. That's the power of digging down to the first principle.
So when you boil it all down, the framework is really quite simple. You learn by building a tree of knowledge, starting with the fundamentals. And you solve problems by breaking them all the way down to their most basic truths. This isn't just a trick for billionaires. It's a truly powerful way for any of us to think more clearly. And that really just leaves one question for you to think about. In your own life, in your own work, what's that one common assumption that everyone just accepts as true? And are you willing to start asking why?